Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. A new report from the Institute of Medicine reveals that diagnostic errors are frequent and potentially deadly. Why aren't they better known? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
It's estimated that 10% of patient deaths result from missed diagnoses, but patients and families may not be alerted to these mistakes. Why is there such a culture of secrecy in medicine, and how can it be changed?
Many doctors fear that they'll be sued if they disclose an error, but research indicates that transparency and apology are cornerstones in building trust and reducing litigation.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, a physician tells how it feels to be the victim of repeated misdiagnosis and denial.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, the CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals has caved under pressure and reduced the price hike of a drug used to treat toxoplasmosis. Martin Shkreli encountered a great deal more outrage than he bargained for when he boosted the price of Daraprim by more than 5,000%. The drug is essential for treating a parasitic infection in immunocompromised patients. Before Turing Pharmaceuticals bought the drug from Impax Laboratories, a pill cost $13.50. Pricey, but affordable. After Mr. Shkreli and his associates raised the price to $750 a pill, the public outburst was overwhelming. Eventually, the company decided to back down and lower the price. Perhaps the pharmaceutical industry will learn from this debacle and reconsider its pricing policies, especially for life-saving medications.
People with dementia are prone to agitation and even aggression. This can be extremely difficult for families or institutions to manage. In the past, such patients have been medicated with powerful antipsychotic drugs such as Haldol, Seroquel, Abilify, and Zyprexa. The drawback of these drugs is that they put older people with dementia at risk of death because of heart-related events or infections. That leaves caregivers with a terrible challenge. Calming an agitated and confused Alzheimer's patient with an antipsychotic drug could hasten his death.
Now a study has shown that a combination of two medications can ease agitation without serious complications. One of the drugs is dextromethorphan, a primary ingredient in cough medicine sold over the counter. It's the DM in Robitussin DM and similar products. The other medication is quinidine, a century-old drug used to treat heart rhythm abnormalities. In this 10-week study, 220 people with Alzheimer's disease were randomly assigned to receive either the quinidine-dextromethorphan combination or a placebo. The treatment reduced agitation and aggression significantly compared to placebo. An accompanying editorial gives the study high marks, but points out that this drug combination could be dangerous if added to a serotonin reuptake inhibitor such as fluoxetine. There were concerns that patients might experience fatigue, diarrhea, dizziness, or falls, but these were not apparent in the study. If further research confirms that this combination is useful in dealing with the agitation of Alzheimer's disease, it could help both patients and caregivers deal with a challenging situation.
When a text message arrives on the phone, people pay attention. Perhaps that's why a study in Australia found that people trying to adopt healthier lifestyle behaviors benefit from getting encouraging text messages. Researchers recruited 700 people with heart disease. 350 of them were randomly selected to get about 4 text messages every week to help them smoke less, exercise more, and eat a better diet. The remaining 350 continued to get their usual care without any text messages. After 6 months, the text recipients had done significantly better at losing weight and lowering cholesterol and blood pressure than the other group. They had also reduced their smoking and increased physical activity. Volunteers in the text message group overwhelmingly found the messages useful and easy to understand.
Beet juice has been shown to boost muscle performance for athletes. Now a study shows it can also help improve muscle power in people with heart failure. The small study included 9 people with heart failure. They were given either beet juice or a placebo beet juice that had the nitrate removed. 2 hours after drinking beet juice, leg muscles had 13% more power, while the placebo did not lead to improvement.
A new report from the Institute of Medicine suggests that virtually every American will experience a diagnostic error at some point. The respected medical experts estimate that mistakes in diagnosis cause up to 17% of hospital complications and contribute to 10% of patient deaths. That makes diagnostic errors one of the leading causes of death in this country. An analysis of the report concludes that over 18 million diagnostic errors are made by primary care providers in the U.S. each year. Despite the importance of diagnostic errors, they're difficult to measure in part because of lack of transparency. But when a healthcare provider makes a mistake about the cause of a person's symptoms, it can lead to inappropriate treatment and sometimes tragedy. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The prestigious Institute of Medicine released a report this week titled Improving Diagnosis in Healthcare. It revealed that diagnostic errors are common, under-recognized, and potentially deadly. But how would you know you've been the victim of a diagnostic mistake? Traditionally, physicians haven't always shared their errors with patients or families.
To help us better understand the culture of secrecy in medicine, we turn to Dr. Lisa Iazzoni. She's professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and director of the Mongan Institute for Health Policy at the Massachusetts General Hospital.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Iazzoni.
Thank you.
Dr. Iazzoni, what in the world led you to do the research about honesty and doctors?
We set out to do a survey of physicians nationwide about how they felt about aspects of the Charter on Medical Professionalism. That charter was promulgated back in 2002, and it covers a variety of different dimensions of interactions between doctors and patients and the way that doctors should behave as professionals. And communication just happened to be one of the dimensions that was included in that survey.
And of course, the idea is that this communication in both directions presumably should be based on transparency and openness and honesty.
I think absolutely that communication is foundational to the ability for physicians to understand patients' needs and to make their assessments of what would be best for patients and then to communicate their recommendations to patients as clearly as possible. I think, though, communication is inevitably going to be complex because we are talking about health. We are talking about very emotional topics, difficult topics often, sometimes tragic topics. And so there certainly can be times that physicians as humans may modulate what they say or may be somewhat reticent to convey something that they view as something that will be upsetting or difficult for the patient to hear. However, at the end of the day, it is important for patients to know the full truth about their conditions so that they can make the best decisions that they can about their health care.
And yet you did find that quite a few doctors perhaps didn't present a patient's prognosis in its full severity.
Well, what we found was that about 55% of physicians described the patient's prognosis in a more positive manner than warranted. And again, there could be many reasons for this. They could just simply want to be kind to the patient, want to be hopeful, convey their best wishes for the patient. But at the end of the day, it is important for patients to know the full truth about their prognosis to the extent that it's possible for them to make the best decision.
One of the things that you discovered was kind of disconcerting, to be honest with you. And, besides the prognosis, which I can actually understand why a doctor might want to put a positive spin on things to give the patient hope, that there is an opportunity for getting better. But the idea of medical errors, tell us a little bit about what you discovered there.
Yes, that was a bit of a tough one. We found that nearly 20% of physicians had not fully disclosed a mistake to a patient because they were afraid of being sued. That is troubling because, in fact, a growing body of research suggests that if physicians are open with patients about things that are untoward that happened, that patients are less likely to sue them. Certainly, lawsuits have been just a huge problem for some specialties, like obstetrics and neurosurgery, have cost physicians a lot of money in terms of malpractice premiums, and the emotional distress of going through a lawsuit is just unbearable in many circumstances for physicians. But therefore, it makes it even more imperative, in a sense, that they think about some way to be more open with patients when things do go wrong.
Well, we certainly agree. What also caught our eye among your respondents is that almost a third of them said that they didn't think they actually needed to disclose medical errors to patients, which is even more than those who said, well, in the past year they had not fully disclosed an error.
Yeah, that's right. About 34% of physicians said that they did not need to disclose all significant medical errors to affected patients, and these are significant medical errors. That goes against the Charter on Medical Professionalism that, as I said, really motivated this survey, which basically says, yes, you should disclose medical errors to your patients. It really is the best way to regain trust and move forward better together as a team.
Well, it's not just the Charter on Medical Professionalism. It's virtually every hospital in this country states that it expects all of the health professionals under its umbrella to report serious medical errors to the patient and or to the family. And I think all medical ethicists would suggest that that's essential. And yet what you're saying is about a third of the doctors in your survey didn't believe it.
That's right. Did not fully agree that you needed to disclose those significant medical errors. It's true. That's what we found.
Why do you think that is?
Well, again, from this particular survey, we really do not know. Obviously, as I said earlier about behaviors, when we asked about having disclosed mistakes, and 20% said that they had not because of the fear of being sued, I suspect a lot of it is because of the fear of lawsuits. But again, you know, as you say, the basic ethical precepts of the profession as enshrined in the Charter, which has been signed off on by 100 medical professional associations, really indicates that, yes, you are supposed to disclose.
Now, there was another issue that you surveyed, and that had to do with conflict of interest or receiving money from, for example, a drug or a device company. And we also found that somewhat disturbing because there were a number of doctors who said, nah, I don't really think I need to tell people.
Right. And this one, 35.4% did not fully agree that you needed to disclose financial relationships with drug and device companies to patients. That is not so surprising. Again, these would probably be awkward conversations to have, and historically in the past, these have not been conversations that have been talked about very much. But I think in the last 5 to 10 years, especially, the large financial relationships that some physicians have with drug and device manufacturers have become public record and will become so as the Sunshine Act is implemented in a number of years. And so I think that this is a topic that will get a lot more airtime in the years ahead.
Dr. Iazzoni, you reported that roughly 1/5 of the physicians did not fully disclose medical mistakes. Right. And I guess what puzzles me is that the American public seems okay with that for the most part, and yet no doctor, no person would put up with 1 out of 5 mistakes at the bank, 1 out of 5 mistakes with your plumber or with your garage mechanic. Why do you think that we are willing to accept that doctors make mistakes and aren't even willing to share them and just kind of give doctors a pass on that?
Well, we haven't done the survey of patients, so I don't know the extent to which your statement would be true if patients are told these are significant errors. I think that that we also have a lot of public interest in mistakes that appear on the front page of newspapers when, there's wrong-sided surgery or something like that. I think also that patients historically have been less willing to question their physicians' judgments. They view their physicians as professionals who have the knowledge that is superior to their technical knowledge, and they should respect that. And I think that as the baby boomer generation, which tends to be somewhat skeptical, ages into a period of time when more health conditions are at their doorstep, that I think we might see public attitudes about questioning physicians change a little bit.
Dr. Iazzoni, what are the implications of your research for patients?
I think the implications are that the public needs to think very seriously about how they want their physicians to communicate with them, and then make clear to physicians, this is how I want you to talk to me. I think that physicians may not know that a patient may have an understanding that their cancer diagnosis is not going to be one that's easy, and they really want their doctors to be more honest and open with them. Maybe physicians are being too paternalistic, thinking that their patients don't want to know as much as they do. But then there may be patients who really do not want to know everything. And so I think that I really do not like dumping this on patients, because obviously the physicians are the professionals who do need to follow the ethical precepts of our field. But I do think this is a human-to-human interaction, and it's really the patients who must tell the doctors, you have my permission to tell me hard truths.
And does the patient have the right to expect the doctor to tell the family or the patient if a mistake is made?
I think that they should. Yeah, I think that they should, and be open and just talk it through. Figure out what happened, and then the patient will have to judge whether or not they can trust that physician moving forward.
Dr. Lisa Iazzoni, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
You're very welcome.
You've been listening to Dr. Lisa Iazzoni. She's professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and director of the Mongan Institute for Health Policy at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her article was published in the journal Health Affairs. You'll find a link to it from our website, as well as a link to the new Institute of Medicine report, Improving Diagnosis in Healthcare. Absolutely worth a read.
And that report suggests that 10% of patient deaths are due to misdiagnoses. After the break, we'll talk with Dr. Tim McDonald about the 7 pillars of transparency.
What's the scope of medical errors?
The usual hospital response to an error has been deny and defend. How did Dr. McDonald change that at the University of Illinois Hospital?
What remedies does his healthcare system offer to patients harmed through inappropriate care?
Does being transparent reduce the likelihood of litigation or increase it?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you value the health information you get when you listen to the People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1007. That number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we're talking about medical errors and transparency in healthcare. The Institute of Medicine has just issued a report on diagnostic errors. They account for 10% of patient deaths, making this one of the leading causes of death in America. How do families find out when a mistake has been made?
To learn about an innovative program for disclosure and remediation, we turn now to Dr. Tim McDonald. He is the inaugural service chief for anesthesiology at Sidra Medical and Research Center in Qatar. He's also chief of anesthesiology at Weill Cornell Medical College in Qatar. He's also the medical director of quality and safety. Prior to joining Sidra, Dr. McDonald was Chief Safety and Risk Officer for Health Affairs at the University of Illinois. He was also Professor of Anesthesiology and Pediatrics at the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Chicago and Adjunct Professor of Law at Loyola University School of Law. Our discussion today covers his experience at the University of Illinois.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. McDonald.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
How in the world did you get involved in this patient safety movement? What was the moment when you realized that you had to commit a lot of your time and energy to this process?
I would say that moment in time really was the same for me as it has been for a lot of people, which is I had been practicing as a pediatric anesthesiologist for 10 years. I had gone to law school at night and had become a licensed attorney with a focus mostly on child advocacy. And then when the Institute of Medicine to Err as Human was published and became public and well-known, that's when I started to migrate towards more total patient advocacy versus just pediatric advocacy around pain control and things like that.
Now, To Err as Human came out, I believe, in 1999 and said that at least 100,000 people or approximately 100,000 people, they actually had a pretty wide range of estimates of how many people die every year as a consequence of medical errors. We since have come to believe that perhaps it was an undercount. So tell us a little bit, please, about your current assessment of the problem of medical error.
Medical error continues to be, I think, a significant issue. The bigger concern I have is the errors that actually affect patients. And so my general focus is on patient harm, particularly patient harm that is preventable by hospitals and physicians and nurses providing appropriate care or care that meets the standard of care. And it's my belief still that we have significantly greater than 100,000 lives lost every year because of inappropriate care that does not meet the standard related to that. And I think in large part we've come to understand a lot more because of some really great research that's been done that a lot of the infections that patients get, which we used to think were unpreventable, actually are preventable if appropriate guidelines and standards are followed.
One of the problems over the last couple of decades has been a kind of wall of silence, a deny and defend approach to patient harm. And you, in your 7 Pillars program, have really tried to break down that wall. Can you tell us about the 7 Pillars approach and why that has made such a difference at your institution?
The 7 Pillars approach is predicated on providing effective and honest communication to patients and families from the beginning of the therapeutic relationship throughout until that relationship no longer exists. And in doing that, it means that we have an intense focus even on informed consent and shared decision-making so that when things do go awry, it's much easier for the physicians and the other care professionals to provide, again, honest communication to those patients and families. When up front, we've been honest about what the outcome should be, and we've tried to set appropriate expectations. the other part of it is that when harm does occur, it's our commitment, and it's actually, pillar number 2, which is, the first pillar is reporting. The second pillar is to begin that process of effective communication as soon or as near to harm occurring as possible. And that has allowed our care professionals and other people to maintain trust between the patients, their families, and the care professionals. And in the event that we do determine that our care was inappropriate or we did not meet the standards, we do a couple of things. One is to disclose that to the patients and the families and to provide an appropriate remedy for them in addition to expressions of empathy and apology, but also a commitment to them that we will do everything we can to prevent such inappropriate care from happening again. And that has done two things. One is it has empowered patients and families to then participate in the patient safety efforts. And it's also created a great spotlight onto the institution to force function it to continually improve and prevent these kind of events again. So it's a real cultural transformation when you make that decision that you are going to be brutally honest with patients when harm does occur. And that's how things are sort of all connected together as it's related to that.
Dr. McDonald, I've got several questions that this brings to mind. And the first question is, you say you offer patients and families an appropriate remedy beyond an apology, but the apology obviously comes first. What sorts of appropriate remedies?
Well, there will be, some occasions where, and in fact, in all of our situations where we've determined our care is inappropriate, we waive all hospital fees as well as professional fees. This is going way above and beyond the CMS no pay for bad performance, sort of project, in that's just hospital fees. In our case, it's all fees that are associated with the inappropriate care, both hospital and other professional fees. And we actually have created a card that's called the Patient Safety Compensation Card. The patients can use when they come back to our organization for ongoing care related to errors or mistakes that we have made. And that card serves as sort of their insurance card so that our Department of Safety and Risk Management gets billed and not their insurance company. And this allows us to create a financial tracking of the impact of mistakes that we make that harm patients. In addition to that, there will be other out-of-pocket expenses that families will have. I mean, in the case of a death that's a result of our inappropriate care, we would be handling funeral expenses, other things that might be appropriate to compensate that. And in some cases, there is other financial remuneration which is appropriate, which particularly if it's a person who's the breadwinner in the family, there are clearly going to be significant economic damages related to that for which we would provide compensation. And as unsavory as it sounds, the process still is in this country for some patients that the financial reimbursement for pain and suffering is a commitment on the organization to try to make good and to be held accountable for the harm that they occur.
Dr. McDonald, what you're saying is almost heretical, I am sure, for most hospitals in this country because there is such a fear of litigation, and not just hospitals. I think doctors as well in private practice, in ambulatory care. The idea of being as transparent as you are at your hospital and then reimbursing patients, paying for their medical bills. My suspicion is that there are a lot of doctors right now who are shaking their head in astonishment saying, wow, I mean, wouldn't this just increase the risk of additional litigation? What's going on? And by the way, for our listeners, you are an attorney as well as a physician.
Right. So, I mean, our data that we have, and it's also data that's consistent with what Rick Boothman has demonstrated and published from the University of Michigan, and what we're seeing from Jeff Driver out in Stanford is a actual decrease in litigation, not an increase in litigation when this sort of approach is taken. But there are sort of reasonable fears that exist within physicians, which again, as I say, are reasonable, because the current way that our processes are set up do discourage individual physicians and their medical malpractice professional liability carriers from being, fully honest and providing appropriate compensation, because for the individual physician, they, in most states, will be reported to their, state licensing boards. And with the National Practitioner Data Bank, unless they're able to avoid a formal claim being filed for what compensation they give, they may get reported to the data bank as well. So one of the big areas I'm interested in is sort of the perverse set of incentives that are out there right now that, from a regulatory standpoint, serve as barriers to docs wanting to do the right thing, which is to apologize when they know care has been inappropriate and they may have played a part in that, and appropriate compensation to be provided. But on the overall litigation side and the dollars associated with programs that are transparent, the data is really coming together to show that those fears are now unfounded.
Dr. McDonald, it seems to me that if you have a way of tracking through your financial records the financial impact of the compensation that is awarded patients in the event of harm happening, something bad happened, it shouldn't have happened, and your patient then is able to get care to take care of that problem, and your hospital, your department, in fact, is picking up the tab. Doesn't that give you an incentive then to try and reduce the number of events that occur?
Well, and it absolutely does. And as you know, data and knowledge are power. And to have that kind of financial data to give feedback to the teams providing the care is very powerful. And it can be used in certain ways to create incentives for improved care and improved teamwork by giving this kind of sort of transparent feedback to those involved in the delivery of care to recognize that, unlike the old days, unlike the last 5 to 10 years where we got paid more for the more complications we had, this can be pretty powerful as a message back to those who are driven by data, which includes a whole lot of physicians.
What sorts of changes have been instituted at the University of Illinois as a result of this?
Multiple system changes. For example, we have had implemented at the U of I for quite some time an electronic health record. We have had computerized physician order entry for over 25 years. We were one of the first institutions in the country to have CPOE. And we spend a great deal of time looking at our harm events to see whether or not modifications or improvement in our electronic health system are necessary. And we have identified where there have been times we have not designed the order entry system, or we have not designed other parts of the record, whether it's how allergies are documented or what have you. We've made a lot of changes in that based on the cases we've done a deep dive on and found common causes for harm occurring. In addition to that, we also have implemented a lot of decision support within the electronic health record that is able to, when certain medications are prescribed, to look into laboratory tests to see whether or not that medication needs to be modified based on the patient's, say, current, kidney function or what have you for doing that. And then a whole lot of other changes as it's related to, beyond the electronic health record in terms of how we manage patients, how we prevent retained surgical objects, how we prevent, wrong-sided surgery, how we prevent blood clots in patients. There's been a whole great deal of work done around focusing on some of those really serious harm events.
Dr. McDonald, can you tell us what the 7 pillars are briefly so that other health professionals can learn from your experience?
Sure. The 7 pillars, the first pillar is reporting. And it's our belief that you can't fix what you don't know about. And so the big focus has been on reporting, number one. Number two And number 3 is once the report is made and there's an assessment of harm, and if harm has occurred, we commence an immediate investigation and we start to begin the effective communication piece of it, what we call the Patient Communication Consult Service, a group of people that we have that ensures that patients and families are kept up to date when harm occurs, independent of whether care was appropriate or not. Pillar number 4 is related to once our investigation is completed and we've had all the docs and nurses and pharmacists and other people meet, once if they come to a consensus that our care was inappropriate or we did not meet the standard of care, we will then provide a disclosure of the mistakes that we made, an apology, as well as an appropriate remedy. And so that's Pillar 4. Pillar 5, which is the critical piece, and we think the most important part, and how the 7 pillars leads to improved patient safety, is the commitment for process and performance improvement, which is Pillar 5, which, flows from what we've learned from these, fully transparent, brutally honest investigations. Pillar 6 sort of lies behind all of that, which is we collect tons of data on everything, data on reporting, data on effectiveness of communication, data on our remedies we provided and performance improvement. And so data is number 6. And the final one, which we think is critical for moving forward and something that we're totally committed to as an academic institution, is education of the whole process. From the beginning of entry into the health science schools all the way through graduate education and then up into continuing education. And so that kind of completes the circle of what the 7 pillars are comprised of.
You're listening to Dr. Timothy McDonald, the inaugural service chief for anesthesiology at Sidra Medical and Research Center in Qatar. He is also medical director of quality and safety at Sidra. He holds the position of Chief of Anesthesiology at Weill Cornell Medical College in Qatar. Prior to joining Sidra, Dr. McDonald was Chief Safety and Risk Officer for Health Affairs at the University of Illinois. He was also Professor of Anesthesiology and Pediatrics at the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Chicago and Adjunct Professor of Law at Loyola University School of Law. The program we're talking about was instituted at the University of Illinois.
Coming up, Dr. McDonald will tell us what other healthcare systems could learn about transparency from the 7 Pillars program at University of Illinois.
How does transparency affect the cost of healthcare?
We'll also talk with Dr. Neil Spector. We'll learn about his experience both as a patient and as a doctor. Why is apologizing for an error so very difficult?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening to this podcast of The People's Pharmacy. If you like it, why not rate or review it in the iTunes store? We'd appreciate it. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you would like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1007. That number again, 800-732-2334. Or you can place the order online at peoplespharmacy.com.
This week, the Institute of Medicine issued a report titled Improving Diagnosis in Healthcare. It shows that diagnostic errors are a leading cause of medical malpractice claims. One analysis found that more than 5% of diagnoses in primary care are wrong, leading to an estimated total of more than 18 million mistakes per year. Diagnostic errors can be difficult to discover, But what do healthcare systems do when they find one?
Our guest is Dr. Tim McDonald. He's the inaugural service chief for anesthesiology at Sidra Medical and Research Center in Qatar, where he's also medical director of quality and safety. He also holds the position of chief of anesthesiology at Weill Cornell Medical College in Qatar. Prior to joining Sidra, Dr. McDonald was Chief Safety and Risk Officer for Health Affairs at the University of Illinois. He was also Professor of Anesthesiology and Pediatrics at the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Chicago and Adjunct Professor of Law at Loyola University School of Law. Today, we're discussing a program he inaugurated at the University of Illinois.
Now, Dr. McDonald, the way in which people learn, the way in which health professionals learn, and certainly the way in which patients learn is through stories. And I'm wondering if you could share with us a story or two about how this process has unfolded, the way in which a patient may have been harmed and the way in which you've learned from that.
Yeah, there's a couple of stories. I think one of the most powerful ones occurred when we had a patient who, through a what we would call sort of a botched transition in care from the outpatient to the inpatient side and breakdowns in communication, received a double dose of chemotherapy that was pretty powerful. And that second dose the patient received that they shouldn't have received caused a significant amount of damage to all of her mucous membranes. Her eyes, her mouth, her GI tract, everything. And she was admitted to the intensive care unit and was profoundly debilitated by this extra dose of chemotherapy. Interestingly, there would have been no way in just looking at the standard medical record and what was available to know the second dose had occurred. The only person who had it within what wasn't part of the electronic record was the attending physician. And initially, he was a non-believer in the sort of transparent approach that we had adopted. But he came to us because he was feeling horrible about what it is that had happened and wanted to reach out to this patient in the intensive care unit. And our communication consult service then facilitated that. And he was able to go up there and explain to her the reason that she felt so bad is because he'd made a mistake and had provided her with a second dose of chemotherapy. And, you know, unbeknownst to her, because it's an automatic thing we do, we had already begun the process of waiving all of her hospital fees and her professional fees as part of that, but that was sort of behind the scenes. But as I sat there, at the end of the conversation, something happened that had a very profound emotional effect on me and everybody, and it's when the woman looked at the doc, and the first thing she said is, "I can't believe you're being this honest to me." And then after she paused for a while and she started to cry a bit, she said, "But I am so glad you told me that, because now that I know that I feel this bad because of a mistake that you made that won't happen again, I will have the courage to proceed with my chemotherapy plan. Otherwise, had this been the way I would feel, I would rather die than go through this chemotherapy." And so because he was honest with her, she was able to, in fact, proceed with chemotherapy and is alive today. And it was a very transformative moment for all the people, the entire team, including us, who were involved in her care and in communicating to her. The case had a huge impact on the way that we managed the transition from outpatient to inpatient with many of our oncology patients. And it turned an agnostic physician into a champion for the whole concepts around transparency.
Dr. McDonald, what would you like your colleagues around the country, hospital administrators, physicians in the trenches, to learn from your experience?
You know, to not be afraid, to be totally honest. It's as Rick Boothman has said, you know, we shouldn't need a court system to tell us when our care is inappropriate. And that we should be able to handle this problem with patient safety and even issues around tort and malpractice by focusing on the front end of reducing harm so we don't even have to worry about the litigation area down the road, and that it is a profoundly transformative process that's very positive for the organization, that's willing to look itself in the mirror and know when mistakes have been made and not hide behind, a ton of lawyers or law firms or what have you in terms of dealing with that. And I think that's something that everybody can learn in all of the organizations where healthcare is provided.
One of the really biggest problems that we face in America today when it comes to economics is the rising cost of healthcare. Everybody bemoans it. Everybody's trying to solve it. But it seems like the kind of quality control that you are implementing could have positive effects on containing costs. At the same time, it's improving quality.
And, I completely agree with you that, as others have said, insurance companies should not have to pay for bad quality care, and that includes Medicare. And it seems to me that what we all see in all the hospitals where we are, there is it continues to be, although we have made, I think, a lot of improvements in certain areas, there continues to be a lot of opportunity to improve the quality of our care that should translate into massive savings. When you even look at our institution alone, when you look at what we waive for inappropriate care on the hospital side and the professional fees, it's a substantial number. And if you multiply that through thousands and thousands of hospitals, you're talking billions and billions of dollars of savings related to that. And that's one reason, again, why people are looking very closely at our data as we begin to do this. And what I remind people is, even though we may be losing a bit on the reimbursement side, we're gaining way more than that on the liability side. So, and it creates a culture for improvement and transformation. And so it's kind of the win-win-win as we take a look at that.
Dr. Timothy McDonald, we really want to thank you for explaining this to us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
You've been listening to Dr. Tim McDonald, the inaugural service chief for anesthesiology at Sidra Medical and Research Center in Qatar, where he's also medical director of quality and safety. He's also chief of anesthesiology at Weill Cornell Medical College in Qatar. Prior to joining Sidra, Dr. McDonald was chief of safety and risk officer for health affairs at the University of Illinois. He was also professor of anesthesiology and pediatrics at the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Chicago and adjunct professor of law at Loyola University School of Law. The Seven Pillars program was instituted at the University of Illinois under his supervision.
We turn now to Dr. Neil Spector. He's the Sandra P. Coates Chair in Breast Cancer Research and an Associate Professor of Medicine, as well as Pharmacology and Cancer Biology at Duke University Medical Center. He co-directs the Developmental Therapeutics Program for the Duke Cancer Institute and is a Komen Scholar in addition to his clinical work. His book is Gone in a Heartbeat, A Physician's Search for True Healing.
Dr. Neil Spector, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Dr. Spector, as an oncologist and as someone who has had an interesting career as a patient yourself, you no doubt have some thoughts about doctors and patients communicating. We have heard this hour from a couple of people who have shown us that frequently doctors don't tell or don't want to tell patients when they have made a mistake, for example, when they don't know what the diagnosis might be. And we have also heard from a physician who has shown us how things can work when the organization commits itself to transparency, to disclosing mistakes, to making things right as they can be. Can you give us a little bit of perspective from your background?
Sure. So I'll just start by saying that communication is the key. So communication between physicians and patients and having a relationship with patients. getting to know the individual. There's so much concern about, we live in a society where lawsuits fly around that most physicians and institutions are not willing to openly admit when a mistake is made. For a variety of reasons, I think the most practical is probably the fear of lawsuits and impact on reputation. I think there's data, at least I've always been taught, that if you have a good relationship and you communicate with your patient, even if you make a mistake, and I'll get to the mistake aspect of this, that you're much less likely to get into trouble if you have rapport with your patient. That physicians, no matter how great a physician you are, if you're seen as aloof and cold, and whatever mistake you made, whether it's a mistake of omission or a mistake that, quite frankly, is just of misdiagnosis of no fault of your own in a tricky case, that you're much more likely to be sued if you don't have a good rapport with your patient. That's number one. And as a patient, I could tell you that the physicians who I've had good rapport with, I'm much more willing to accept, the fact that maybe they made a mistake than somebody who I don't know from Adam. So the mistakes. Look, physicians are people. We only know what we know. And the reality is we know very little about human biology. I mean, we're very reactive, right? Someone comes in with high blood pressure, we give them a pill. We don't understand what the underlying cause of their high blood pressure is. Just take a pill. You come in with pain. We often don't figure out where the pain's coming from. You take a pill, you do something. So, it's not difficult to imagine, because we are a reactive medical profession, that we often miss the etiology of the symptoms. And so if you're not looking for something, you're not going to find it. I mean, in my case, I was misdiagnosed with Lyme disease. The disease was missed, and I was told I had stress because my physicians weren't looking for it. And so, I think that there are mistakes that are made because it's a simple misdiagnosis. There are mistakes that are made because they're frankly malpractice and bad medicine, and they're not what the standard of care should be. You give a treatment that is completely, wrong when you have a diagnosis. That's a problem. So I think that to be transparent with patients, number one, means that you have to have the trust of patients and you have to have a good rapport with patients. And then I think that saying to somebody, we didn't get the diagnosis right, but we're going to correct that and we're going to do everything we can to try to, make you feel better and to, treat your underlying problem is one thing.
Saying you're sorry seems so simple.
Yeah.
But if you're a doctor, that can be really hard. And the notion of just admitting a mistake and getting on with it and trying to make it better oftentimes is all a patient really wants to know. But whether you're a politician or a physician or a banker or a lawyer, sometimes the inclination is to try and cover it up or to obfuscate or to just avoid the problem in the first place by not saying a thing. Why is that really a mistake in medicine, and how can we help your colleagues and patients recognize that, we're all human and we're all going to make mistakes, and then we're just going to have to try and fix things as best we can?
Right. Well, I think it's, as physicians, we're taught to help people. And to not help somebody, and especially to not help somebody because of a mistake you've made, it gets to the very core of our training. So it's almost an ego thing that physicians are, it's admitting defeat. Look, the words we use in medicine, it's like a battle. We're going to battle with your disease, our armamentarium. It's as a physician, we often think we're judged by our win-loss records. I mean, this is worse than baseball, right? If you have a loss on the column, that's pretty bad. I mean, you want to be 11-0, not 10-1. And so it's a situation where physicians want to be this, all omnipotent person on a pedestal, even though at the same time we want patients and the public to realize that we're only human and we don't know everything. And we are, unfortunately, prone to mistakes. And unfortunately, in contrast to your refrigerator repairman, the mistakes that we're prone to could cost you your life. So it's a very difficult situation when physicians feel like they're letting down their patient because the patient has entrusted us with their lives to say, I'm really sorry, which is very simple and is something we should be done. This should be taught in medical school. Rather than saying in medical school, you're the doctor, you cure that patient at all costs, you don't go home at night until you cure them. We should be taught it's okay. It's not okay to make a mistake that you shouldn't make. It's okay to say, you know what, I'm only a human being. I didn't figure it out. I gave it my best shot. I didn't figure it out. I got consults. I got the help of my colleagues. I'm sorry we didn't get the right diagnosis, but we're going to do everything we can to make you feel better. There's nothing wrong with that. That should be part of Medicine 101 the day you hit the door, is that you're not a perfect human being. You're going to make mistakes, and you have to admit that.
Dr. Neil Spector, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Dr. Neil Spector. He's the Sandra P. Coates Chair in Breast Cancer Research and an Associate Professor of Medicine as well as Pharmacology and Cancer Biology at Duke University Medical Center. His book is Gone in a Heartbeat, A Physician's Search for True Healing. He had to have a heart transplant because his infection with Lyme disease went undiagnosed for many years.
We spoke earlier with Dr. Tim McDonald, Service Chief for Anesthesiology at Sidra Medical and Research Center in Qatar. Previously, Dr. McDonald was Chief Safety and Risk Officer for Health Affairs at the University of Illinois.
We also spoke with Dr. Lisa Iazzoni. She's professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and director of the Mongan Institute for Health Policy at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Her article was published in the journal Health Affairs, and there's a link to it from our website.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered it. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334 or find it on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you'll find a link to the Institute of Medicine report on improving diagnosis in medicine. You can also share your own experience and thoughts on today's show. Have you ever experienced a medical mistake? Tell us about it.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit BetterHelp.com/StopTheStigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.